Chapter 14 of Jimbo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Jimbo by Algernon Blackwood. Read by Adrian Pretzelis. Chapter 14. An Adventure. But Miss Lake did not always accompany him on these excursions into the night. Sometimes he took long flights by himself, and she rather encouraged him in this, saying it would give him confidence in case he ever lost her and was obliged to find his way about alone. "But I couldn't get really lost," he said once to her. "I know the winds perfectly now, and the country round for miles, and I never go out in fog." "But these are only practice flights," she replied. "The flight of escape is a very different matter. I want you to learn all you possibly can, so as to be prepared for anything." Jimbo felt vaguely uncomfortable when she talked like this. "But you'll be with me in the escape flight, the final one of all," he said, "and nothing ever goes wrong when you're with me." "I should like to be always with you," she answered tenderly, "but it's well to be prepared for anything just the same." And more than this the boy could never get out of her. On one of these lonely flights, however, he made the unpleasant discovery that he was being followed. At first he only imagined there was somebody after him because of the curious vibrations of the very rarefied air in which he flew. Every time his flight slackened and the noise of his own wings grew less, there reached him from some other corner of the sky a sound like the vibrations of large wings beating the air. It seemed behind and generally below him, but the swishing of his own feathers made it difficult to hear with distinctness, or to be certain of the direction. Evidently it was a long way off, but now and again, when he took a spurt and then sailed silently for several minutes on outstretched wings, the beating of distant following feathers seemed unmistakably clear, and he raced on again at full speed, more than terrified. At other times, however, when he tried to listen, there was no trace of this other flyer, and then his fear would disappear, and he would persuade himself that it had been imagination. So much on these flights he knew to be imagination, the sentences, voices, and laughter, for instance, that filled the air and sounded so real, yet were actually caused by the wind rushing past his ears, the rhythm of the wing beats, and the tips of the feathers occasionally rubbing against the sides of his body. But at last one night the suspicion that he was followed became a certainty. He was flying far up in the sky, passing over some big city, when the sound rose to his ears, and he paused, sailing on stretched wings, to listen. Looking down into the immense space below, he saw, plainly outlined against the luminous patch above the city, the form of a large flying creature moving by with rapid strokes. The pulsations of its great wings made the air tremble so that he both heard and felt them. It may have been that the vapours of the city distorted the thing, just as the earth's atmosphere magnifies the rising or setting of the moon. But even so, it was easy to see that it was something a good deal larger than himself, and with a much more powerful flight. Fortunately, it did not seem this time to be actually on his trail, for it swept by at a great pace, and was soon lost in the darkness far ahead. Perhaps it was only searching for him, and his great height had proved his safety. But in any case he was exceedingly terrified, and at once turned round, pointed his head for the earth, and shot downwards in the direction of the empty house as fast as ever he could. But when he spoke to the governess she made light of it, and told him there was nothing to be afraid of. It might have been a flock of hurrying night birds, she said, or an owl distorted by the city's light, or even his own reflection magnified in water. Anyhow, she felt sure it was not chasing him, and he need pay no attention to it. Jimbo felt reassured, but not quite satisfied. He knew a flying monster when he saw one, and it was only when he had been for many more flights alone without its reappearance that his confidence was fully restored, and he began to forget about it. Certainly these lonely flights were very much to his taste. His older self, with its dim hauntings of a great memory somewhere behind him, took possession then, and he was able to commune with nature in a way that the presence of the governess made impossible. With her his older self rarely showed itself above the surface for long. He was always the child. But when alone, nature became alive. He drew force from the trees and flowers, and felt that they all shared a common life together. Had he been imprisoned by some wizard of old in a tree form, knowing of the sunset and the dawn only by the sweet messages that rustled in his branches, the wind could hardly have spoken to him with a more intimate meaning, or the life of the fields, eternally patient, have touched him more nearly with their joys and sorrows. It seemed almost as if from his leafy cell he had gazed before this into the shining pools with which the summer rains jewelled the meadows, sending his soul in a stream of unsatisfied yearning up to the stars. It all came back dimly when he heard the wind among the leaves, and carried him off to the woods and fields of an existence far antedating this one. And on gentle nights, when the wind itself was half asleep and dreaming, the pine trees drew him most of all, for theirs was the song he loved above all others. He would fly round and round that little grove by the mountain lake, listening for hours together to their sighing voices. But the governess was never told of this, whatever she may have guessed, for it seemed to him a joy too deep for words, the pains and sweetness being mingled too mysteriously for him ever to express in awkward sentences. Moreover, it all passed away, and was forgotten the moment the child took possession and usurped the older memory. One night, when the moon was high and the air was cool and fragrant after the heat of the day, Jimbo felt a strong desire to get off by himself for a long flight. He was full of energy, and the space craving cried to be satisfied. For several days he had been content with slow, stupid expeditions with the governess. "I'm off alone to-night," he cried, balancing on the window ledge, "but I'll be back before dawn. Good-bye." She kissed him, as she always did now, and with her good-bye ringing in his ears, he dropped from the window and rose rapidly over the elms and away from earth. This night, for some reason, the stars and the moon seemed to draw him, and with tireless wings he mounted up, up, up to a height he had never reached before. The intoxication of the strong night air rose into his brain, and he dashed forward ever faster with a mad delight into the endless space before him. Mile upon mile lay behind him as he rushed onwards, always pointing a little on the upward slope, drunk with speed. The earth faded away to a dark expanse of shadow beneath him, and he no longer was conscious of the deep murmur that usually flowed steadily upward from its surface. He had often before risen out of reach of the earth noises, but never so far that this dull reverberating sound, combined of all the voices of the world merged together, failed to make itself heard. To-night, however, he heard nothing. The stars above his head changed from yellow to